After he had walked for many, many miles, he came to a city full of lots of people. Walked into the streets that were busy. There's marketplaces, all these things going around. When suddenly a man on a horse jumps riding in and he announces the king's daughter wants a husband. But for anyone who courts the daughter of the king, they must go through a dangerous task. And if you do not succeed, you will die. Now, many young men had already failed. But when this young man saw this princess, he saw her beauty, he saw something inside of her, he forgot about all the danger, and he went to the king and he announced himself as a suitor. So the king and the court, they took the young man down to the sea. The king pulled out a ring and he tossed it into the depths of the sea. It says, your task is to go down and get that ring. And if you come up without it, then we're going to throw you back in again and again into those ways until you perish. All the village, they gathered around and they grieved that such a handsome young man was about to perish. And they left him there alone by the sea. Now, as this young man was pondering what to do, how to go about this, 3 fish began swimming up from the depths, and the one in the middle had a mussel shell in its mouth. They came up and they laid it at its feet, and they say, good sir, we are the 3 fish that you helped save. We heard of your trouble, and we went down there and got this ring out of this mussel shell. He picked it up, opened it. Sure enough, right inside, there was the ring. The young man says, thank you so much, and very joyfully, excitedly ran up to the king and gave him the ring, expecting his reward. But when the princess saw that he was not of the same birth, right, not of the same status, she scorned him and says, no, you don't get to marry me just yet. You must perform another task. And she walked him down into the garden where there was these 10 giant bags, giant sacks of millet seeds. And with her own hands, she scooped it out and strewed them all over the garden, all throughout the grass. And she says, by morrow, you must have plucked every one of these seeds, put them back into these bags. There cannot be a single seed wanting, or you will be executed. And she left. Now the servant, no, not the servant, the young man. The young man was troubled. It's like, there's no way I can complete this task by the morrow. What am I going to do? Sat there troubled and really feeling like, in the morning he might be led to his death. So he's trying to think of what he can do. When suddenly the rays of the morning sun came shining through, and he looked up and he saw all 10 sacks were full, and there wasn't a single seed missing. And then he heard the voice of the ant king, who had came in the night with thousands of his industrious workers. And he says, good sir, we have come and we filled these sacks for you. Please be happy. The young man said, thank you. And just then the princess walked down the stairs and saw, to her bewilderment, that he had completed the task. But she was still, because of her proud heart, she wasn't willing to concede and marry this man. So she says, he will not be my husband until he brings me one of the golden apples from the tree of life. Now, this young man, he didn't know where the tree of life was, but he was willing to do whatever it took. So he began his trek. He walked across many lands. He was going to walk for as long as his legs would take him. He went across the 3 kingdoms, came to a woods, and he was about to lay beneath a tree and go to sleep for the night when suddenly he heard some rustling up above, and out came a golden apple that fell into his lap. And then 3 ravens flew down and landed on his knee and says, we are the 3 ravens that you helped from starving. We heard that you were seeking the apple from the tree of life. So we sailed across the great sea to the very edge of the world, and we brought it back for you." The young man thanked them. He went back to the kingdom, and now the princess had no more excuses. So they split the apple in half, and they each ate of the apple. And when she ate of the apple, the veils of her own delusions fell away, and she saw the young man for his courage, for his beauty of heart and soul, and she fell in love. And they lived together to a very great age. And that is the story of the white snake. So as we reflect in this third part of the story, what we see here is that because this young man was able to humble himself, come back into relatedness with others and grant beingness to others, where he was willing to show up and be of service to others when they were in a time of need. He never asked, "Well, if I do this, then you should give me that." Instead, he just showed up with a kind heart. This is that role of the peacemaker. The peacemaker brought in that directive of peace being the greater law of mind, of the land, of himself. Right? Now, so we see in this how, because he was willing to show up for others, that when he was in need, others showed up for him. Now, through this indigenous culture, we see this taps into what we call a gifting culture rather than a transactional culture. Rather than always looking for, well, what am I going to get out of this? We can say, how can I apply the law of the peacemaker? How can I just show up and be of service to the people who are right here in front of me? How do I just show up? And recognize that through the laws of nature, nature will come and provide for us in turn. Now, you may reflect on this part of the story where the princess seems like she's kind of snooty, right? She's kind of highborn. Maybe she might not really be worthy of this young man's heart, right? And his sense of willingness to go, right? But what we see here is another aspect of the peacemaker where he sees through those veils. He sees that she has the veils that he once had, that he had to disrobe. And he follows that law of the peacemaker where he looks directly at her at the soul level, of seeing how we are all part of the world. And because he could recognize that part of himself in her, he was willing to do whatever it took for him to bring that sense of wholeness in. So we can see that this isn't a woman like as far as like a prize, right? And we may remember that she's the one who began this journey, who said, "I want a husband." Wasn't the king that says, "It's time for my daughter to have a husband." In the story, it says, the princess wants a husband. And so she's creating all these tests in order to prove the right man, the right nobility. But as soon as they eat of the apple, right, just like in the Garden of Eden, the veils came away. And she was able to see the purity, the courage, the strength of that heart. And so we see maybe like the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine now come together, right? There's these other aspects of like, what is it inside of us that is ready to become whole, right? So in this part of the journey, we may ask ourselves or reflect, how do we become part of that peacemaker when we see adversity being thrown at us? Like with this beautiful young man, he says, "Well, I will show up." He didn't say it's like, "Wow, what a nasty girl who says suddenly I have to go do these things because of her attitude." Instead, he just says, "Well, I will show up. I will do what is necessary to be done." Where in our own life may we let go of our own ego and come into a place to recognize, you know, what is beyond the veil, to see the nobility of soul in others, to see the beauty in others despite what they may project onto us. And how by doing so, we will empower them to come into their own nobility. So, throughout this whole journey of these three stages here, we see this individual grow from being a servant of an outside power, come into his own nobility of soul, be tested, and leave the comfort of what was known and come into a space where he was now able to grant beingness to others and become into a place of relatedness. That each one was greeted with challenges, but he followed the law of the peacemaker that allowed him to come into this space, see beyond the veils, and hold peace and beauty and nobility of others as the greater directive. And so, in doing so, we see that those rewards in life and nature has a way of coming back and breathing back into ourselves. So, right here, we see a map of where we may be, what kind of calling may be just beyond the periphery of our awareness. And that we can trust that by answering that and stepping into the unknown, there is going to be this reciprocal reaction of nature moving with us as we come into greater relatedness. Love to hear your reflections. Oh, that's the story of the white snake.